2,000 years ago, the Apostle John prophesied that there would be a world government ruling the entire earth just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ. We will show you absolute proof that this world governing body is already established and how to recognize it today on Politics and Religion.
Look, there are two things I don't discuss: politics and religion.
In my house, we don't talk about politics and we don't talk about religion.
I'll talk to you about anything except politics and religion.
I never talk about politics and religion.
Politics determines how we'll live here on earth. Religion determines how we'll live forever. I'm Irvin Baxter. I think it's time we talk about it.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dave Robbins with Endtime Ministries, and this is Politics and Religion today. And Irvin Baxter is on vacation for the next couple days, and he's not sick. I've had some people calling in and wondering if he was sick or something. He actually feels better than he has in a long time, but he just needed to get away for a couple days, and I'm happy that he's able to do that. So I hope you'll join me for a couple interesting programs that we got lined up for the next couple days, and then Irvin will be back to do the on-air, the live open-air program on Friday. So I'm happy that he gets to get away here. So anyway, we're going to talk today. We talked to you yesterday about modern nations in the Bible, where we're going to show you how the Bible prophesies that those modern nations will form a one-world government before it's all over with, and it's all prophesied in the Bible. But before we get into that, just before I walked in here, I found an interesting article to give you an idea what globalists and internationalists think about the United Nations. What was it designed to do? And it states that on October 23rd, marking the 70th anniversary of the organization of the United Nations, ahead of the UN Day on the 24th of October, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said that there is only one flag that belongs to everyone, and that's the blue flag of the United Nations. National flags are a mark of pride and patriotism in every country around the world, but there is only one flag that belongs to all of us, and that is the blue flag of the United Nations. Are you willing to pledge allegiance to the blue flag of the United Nations? Well, if the answer is no, I'm absolutely right there with you. I will never, ever pledge allegiance to that flag, any one world governing body, or the leader of that one world government. Absolutely not. That would be part of taking the mark of the beast. On down in the article, Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General, actually states the United Nations is the parliament of humanity. The parliament would be the supreme legislative body of all of humanity. I don't believe that. So consequently, the United States signed a declaration of independence, not declaration of interdependence on any world governing body. So I actually do not believe in what Mr. Ban Ki-moon is saying, but he's letting us know how these globalists and these internationalists think, or a federalist. They understand that the United Nations is the one world governing body, and he's telling us right here. And there will come a time in the near future when you and I will be asked to pledge allegiance to that world governing body and this flag of the United Nations. You should never, ever, ever do that. Well, this article goes right along with what I'm talking about today. New World Order is world government. We hear the term New World Order more frequently today than ever before. But what is the New World Order? The New World Order is simply world government in its clearest form. However, it is not just any world government. It is the world government of the Antichrist. This world government is being formed right now, and it is prophesied about in Scripture. The term New World Order is written on the back of your U.S. dollar bill. You'll find it written in Latin inside the ribbon, just below the pyramid with the all-seeing eye at the top. It says, Novus Ordo Seclorum. Pull out a dollar bill, and you'll see what I'm saying. The word novus means new. The word ordo means order, and the word seclorum means secular or world. So we're looking at New World Order on your dollar bill, a U.S. dollar bill. Well, why is this term written on the back of a U.S. dollar bill? Most people don't even know it's there. They just see all these different symbols and different things on the dollar bill. They don't have a clue. Well, it's been there since 1935 and was put there by U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Roosevelt dreamed of building a one world governmental system, and he was the driving force behind the establishment of the United Nations, which was established in 1945. On today's program, we are discussing the world government that's prophesied in the Bible. The prophecy is found in Revelation chapter 13, verse 1 and 2, and it states, "And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear. His mouth was the mouth of the lion, and the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority." Do you remember yesterday's program when we showed you that modern nations, including the United States, which was the eagle's wings, Great Britain, which was the lion, Germany, which had the 4 heads of a leopard, and Russia, the bear, and the Holy Roman Empire, or the European Union, which was the 10-horned beast, were all prophesied in Daniel 7. Well, the symbols between these two passages, Daniel 7 and Revelation 13, are very similar, but Revelation 13 reveals something different to us. It gives a little more clues about what they're talking about. The one beast in Revelation 13 has the body of the leopard, the feet of the bear, the mouth of the lion, the 10 horns of the 10-horn kingdom, but this beast has 7 heads, and the dragon gave him his power and seat and great authority. The beasts from Daniel 7 have the same symbolism, but 4 separate beasts represent the symbols in Daniel 7. So these two books are written 650 years apart. Daniel never met the Apostle John. The book of Daniel was written in 550 BC. In Daniel 7, Daniel saw one beast as a lion with eagle's wings, a separate beast as a bear, a third beast as a leopard with 4 heads, and a fourth, a 10-horned beast. Then Revelation, the book of Revelation, was written 650 years later in about 95 or 96 AD. And John the Revelator sees the exact same symbols from Daniel 7 in a vision given to him by God. The explanation for this is simple. You say, well, how is all this possible? They never met each other. Well, the same author, God, inspired both books, but he just used different writers to write them. The Bible teaches us that when writing the Scriptures, holy men of old wrote as they were moved on by the Holy Ghost to do so. God is the author of all of the books of the Bible, so it is not surprising that the same symbols show up in these prophecies revealed 650 years apart. Revelation 13 merges the 4 beasts from Daniel 7 into one big combo beast, which is a world government. We learned in lesson 1 from Daniel 7:23, a beast represents a kingdom or a nation. We also learned the 4th beast would be a kingdom or nation that would exist at the time of the second coming of Jesus Christ. So what do we learn? Well, the merged beast in Revelation 13 is the beast that represents the one world governmental system. So where are the eagle's wings? Because all of these beasts are mentioned. Remember, it said it had the body of the leopard, feet of the bear, the mouth of the lion, the 4 heads of the leopard, and the 10 horns of the 10-horn kingdom. But the eagle's wings from Daniel 7 are not mentioned. So note the absence of the wings of the eagle, and the absence of the wings of the fowl, which we know as France in Daniel 7, but they're absent in the Revelation 13 prophecy. In Daniel 7, the wings of the eagle were on the back of the lion, and the wings of the fowl were on the back of the leopard. How do we explain this discrepancy? Well, though we cannot be absolute certain There are a couple of explanations. Well, prophecies foretell a great war that's in the very near future. And that war will kill 1/3 of mankind. This prophecy is found in Revelation 9, verse 13 through 21. Well, we know because of everything going on in the Middle East right now and over the past several years that the United States, it's almost positive that we will participate in that war. So it is possible that the United States could sustain major casualties and lose 25 to 50 million people as a result, and which would leave us which we could become a non-factor on the world stage. Or the U.S. may simply decide to pull out of that war. So if you understand the war we're talking about here, it is the Sixth Trumpet War. We've been talking about it a lot lately here on the radio because of what Russia and all of the nations are doing. Iran are there fighting today, as well as the United States. And actually, about 65 nations have gathered there as a huge coalition against ISIS. So we know that the next prophesied event on God's prophetic timeline is this Sixth Trumpet War. So that's the war we're talking about, is that this events that's going on in the Middle East right now could lead us into that war. And that's the war we're talking about here. Could we be so demoralized and destabilized in that war that we won't be a factor on the world stage anymore? That's one scenario that would let us know that, why the eagle's wings weren't mentioned in this world government beast. Then there is the possibility of the United States could pull out of the United Nations and stand with Israel all the way to the second coming of Jesus Christ. Now, I've heard it said, I haven't heard this personally, we tried to document it, that Donald Trump actually said that if he was elected president, he would pull us out of the United Nations. Well, that would be a huge thing for a candidate in this presidential election, because if you understand where we're at on God's prophetic timeline and you're looking at future events, the next president could possibly preside over this Sixth Trumpet War and be at the helm of the United States during that period. So any presidential candidate, whether Democratic or Republican, that says they're going to pull us out of the United Nations, that would be a huge thing for a candidate to say and to do once they got in there, because we signed it, like I said before, we signed a declaration of independence, not interdependence on any one world governing body. So, is it prophesied about the United States standing with Israel all the way to the end? Absolutely. Revelation 12:14 states, "And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for time, and half a times from the face of the serpent." Well, the woman in this chapter is Israel. The times, and half a time is referring to the 3 1/2 years of the Great Tribulation. We choose to believe that the eagle's wings symbolize the United States and that we will stand with and protect Israel all the way to the end. So, the one world government, the combined beast from Revelation 13, represents the end-time government of the Antichrist. The United Nations is the only structure that is specifically designed to be a one world governmental system. We frequently hear the words globalization and New World Order. When we come back from the break, we'll explain to you what the New World Order is. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Join us when we come back.
The seeds of the Battle of Armageddon were sown on November 29th, 2012. The seeds sown on that historic day are in the process of producing a dreadful harvest. The Bible actually describes it as the harvest of Armageddon. Learn the story of what happened on November 29th, 2012, when the seeds were sown for the world's final battle, the growth of which are the events that will occur on the journey to where the story ends, at the reaping of the harvest of Armageddon. Call 1-800-END-TIME to order this important lesson.
Take your understanding of the end time to a new level with our Outlines and Quizzes workbook. This workbook accompanies our Understanding the End Time 14 lesson series. As you watch each lesson, follow along with the outlines, then take a quiz and check your answers at the end. These are all contained in one convenient workbook so you can study as well as teach prophecy wherever you go. Use it as a study guide to cement main points and scriptures that Irvin teaches in each lesson. It's also a great tool if you host an end-time Bible study. Help your group solidify what they're learning by getting a copy for each person to follow along with the video and then to take home and study on their own. Get the workbook by calling 1-800-ENDTIME or go to endtime.com and be ready to instruct many as the scripture says.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm establishing the fact today that the New World Order, the United Nations, is a world governing body. And it's prophesied in Revelation chapter 13. So, are globalization and a new world order good things or bad things? We hear them in the news all the time. But sometimes we don't understand these words that these globalists or internationalists come up with. So, Revelation 13:2 tells us that the dragon gave this combined beast, this world governing beast, his power, his seat, and his great authority. Revelation 12:9 explains the dragon is that old serpent, the devil, and Satan. Therefore, Satan will give the end-time one-world government its power, its seat, and its great authority. The one-world government, the globalization process, and the New World Order is forming now, and it is of the devil. It's not a good thing. The United Nations is not a good thing. The New World Order, not a good thing. Satan is inspiring it. It is not a good thing at all. Revelation 13:3 says, "And I saw one of its heads as it were wounded to death." According to verse 1, the beast has 7 heads. Verse 3 continues, "I saw one of the heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast." What do the 7 heads represent? They represent the perfect combination of the 4 separate beasts of Daniel 7 without the eagle's wings. One head is the lion, second is the bear, there are 4 heads for the leopard, and then 1 head of the 10-horned beast. 7 heads. All the nations, Great Britain, Russia, Germany, and the revived Holy Roman Empire, which is presently known as the European Union, will form the end-time one-world government of the Antichrist, the New World Order. Notice the end of Revelation 13:3 says, "All the world wondered after the beast." The entire world will wonder after this New World Order. Remember what I just talked about with Ban Ki-moon and saying the United Nations, the one blue flag is everyone's flag. Well, this one world government, they're going to follow after the New World Order and this one world governing beast. Most people will believe this to be the greatest thing that has ever happened. So now the Antichrist, in Revelation 13:5, we read, "And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies." This 7-headed, 10-horned beast is going to be given a mouth. From other scriptures, we know this mouth will be the mouth of the Antichrist, the one world leader who will rule for a very short time before the second coming of Christ and the Battle of Armageddon. Verses 5 also says, "And power was given unto this beast, and the mouth that spoke great things to continue 42 months. The reign of the Antichrist will be a 42-month period, not a 7-year period, but a 42-month or a 3.5-year period. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 3 through 4 says, "The Antichrist will be revealed when he stands on the Temple Mount, claiming to be the ultimate authority." The Bible calls this the abomination of desolation. And Jesus Christ said it is at the abomination of desolation that the reign of the Antichrist begins. The abomination of desolation occurs 42 months prior to the Battle of Armageddon and the second coming of Christ. So based on these verifications, we know the Antichrist will reign for 3.5 years. Though it doesn't seem like a very long time, it will be a time of horrible tyranny and will seem longer than it is. His reign will be short but terrible. Jesus said in Matthew 24:21, it would be a time of great tribulation such as never been before. This time of the Antichrist reign will be worse than Hitler's Holocaust and the Crusades of the Middle Ages. So a global language. Let's talk about that because it's mentioned in the prophecy here. Notice this beast from Revelation 13 had 7 heads, but the mouth of the lion. What does that mean? The number one obstruction to world government throughout history has always been the language barrier. The Babylonian people of the Old Testament wanted to build a one world government. Remember the Tower of Babel? They started building a great tower into the heavens, but God stopped them by confusing their languages. God created different languages and kept them from communicating, thus thwarting their intentions. God did not favor their one world government, and He doesn't favor a one world government now. Ultimately, there will be a one world government, but it will be a government set up and ruled by Jesus Christ during the millennial reign. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. When anyone other than the Prince of Peace, Jesus Christ, rules a one world government, it will usher in a time of horrible tyranny. It always has. The Antichrist will be the most corrupt individual that has ever ruled the world. This 7-headed, 10-horned beast with the mouth of the lion represents the process of globalization and the New World Order, moving into form a one world governing body. This New World Order includes the implementation of one language. The global language of the New World Order is English. International pilots who fly international flights are required to speak English. Telephone operators who handle international phone calls must speak English. When Kofi Annan was UN Secretary General, he stated the world community has made the decision that English is the global language. English is the language of the internet as well. Though written 2,000 years ago, Almighty God inspired these prophecies and revealed to us the language of the end-time one-world government. What an incredible prophecy. This should be no surprise to us, however. The Bible teaches us that the hairs of our head are numbered. He knows our downsittings, our uprisings. God has told us through these prophecies that the global language of the end time would be the mouth of the lion. The lion is England. The language is English. The prophecy has already been fulfilled. The United Nations is the only structure for one world government. What is the origin of the UN? Well, if you look back at World War I, also called the Great War, it was the worst war the world had ever known. Prior to this war, there had never been a war with 1 million casualties. But World War I resulted in 8.2 million dead. The world said, never again. It was from this that the idea to establish a structure for global security was birthed. This structure began the League of Nations. The League of Nations was formed in an attempt to ensure another world war would never be fought. U.S. President Woodrow Wilson championed the idea, but the U.S. Congress hesitated at the idea of being a part of a one-world government. They did not want to surrender U.S. sovereignty, so they voted against it. Because Wilson could not carry his own government into the League of Nations, it quickly dismantled and fell apart. 20 years later, however, World War II ended with 52 million casualties. And then, as a result, the cry for world security became even louder than ever. And Franklin D. Roosevelt believed in it, and he was responsible for the term New World Order being printed on the back of the U.S. dollar bill, because he believed in a one-world government. At the end of World War II, Stalin, Churchill, and Roosevelt came together at Yalta in an effort to end all war. It was during these meetings that the charter for the concept of the global governance structure was called the United Nations. The United Nations Charter was written. One key American responsible for the formation of the United Nations was Alger Hiss. He organized the American delegation and served as the acting Secretary General at the first UN meeting. Hiss also served on the steering committee and executive committees and was charged with the responsibility of actually writing the charter, the current UN charter. After playing such a dominant role in developing the charter for the UN and in the founding conference, 3 years later, he was convicted in U.S. courts of lying to cover his activities as a communist spy. Alger Hiss, who wrote the United Nations Charter, the current one, was a convicted communist spy. Previously to this, Hiss accompanied President Franklin Roosevelt to the Yalta Conference, where the carving up of Europe by the United States and Russia took place. At this time, Roosevelt was a dying man. Consequently, Alger Hiss carried the bulk of the negotiations for America. What Russia did not win on the battlefield, she won at the peace table because her own agent, Alger Hiss, was assisting Roosevelt with the negotiations. This explains why Russia received so many concessions at the peace table at the end of World War II. Hiss designed the United Nations to be a global union of socialist republics. The emblem of the Soviet Union is a globe with two sheaves of wheat around it, with the hammer and sickle superimposed. The emblem of the United Nations is also a globe with two olive branches around it. When the insignia of the United Nations was designed, the hammer and sickle was left off because including it would have been too obvious. However, Alger Hiss designed the structure of the United Nations to ultimately become a world socialistic government. Alger Hiss went to prison, but the UN continued to be a structure for the one world government and a governmental system. On September 12, 2012, the Council on Foreign Relations published an article titled "The United Nations and the Future of Global Governance." They contended that the original UN Charter, which we now know was penned by a convicted communist spy, Alger Hiss, was the solution to the conflicts of the world. Listen to a few excerpts from this article to give you an idea what they think about the United Nations and its global governing role. The diplomatic challenge: states must strike the right balance between self-determination and stability. Conflicts where states fight for territories are vanishing. Most armed violence now arises from populations claiming the same territories and or new regimes coming into power. Therefore, the world must be governed as a whole. The UN is the necessary mediator for this global management. The sovereign state is reshaped both internally and externally. The order is governed by a universal social contract governed by the UN. There is no other way to transform this jungle of states into a society. There are three things are necessary to ensure successful global governance. We must balance world powers, garner regional support, and foster trust. As we adapt to emerging global threats, let us not lose sight of what we have achieved. The UN has largely fulfilled the chartered goals written by Alger Hiss, established in San Francisco 70 years ago now, and in doing so has spawned an extensive body of international laws, treaties, practices, and institutions that govern most facets of interstate relations. With these apps, the UN Charter has become the world's central operating system, the motherboard of global governance, making it possible for ideas such as the Millennium Development Goals to become policy drivers. Now, when we get back from the break, I want to talk just a little bit more about the Millennium Development Goals and their role, because they just expired this year and something replaced them. So moving on down through here, and the role of the United Nations in this global governing body, we'll continue on with our lesson. New World Order is world government, and the United Nations is established to be that.
In the space of just 1 week in Paris, France, 8 synagogues were attacked. One was firebombed by a 400-strong mob. Additionally, a kosher supermarket and pharmacy were smashed and looted. The crowds chanted, "Death to the Jews," and slit the Jews' throats. One banner at the demonstrations read, "Israel, hell." There's some more evidence concerning the Great Tribulation and the fact that we actually have entered into the prelude to the Great Tribulation. One person said it's like the 1930s all over again.
Go to endtime.com and under Irvin's Thoughts, click the Great Tribulation to watch this video.
Jesus said that there would be a particular generation that would see specific things take place, and this would be the people that would see his second coming to the earth. The big question is, can we know this generation? Jesus talked about it in Matthew 24. From the fig tree learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and put out its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also, when you see all these things, you know that he is near, at the very gates. Truly, I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Jesus said, when you see these things, what things was he talking about? In the DVD, This Generation Shall Not Pass, Irvin discusses the events that must occur that will let us know the generation that shall not pass until the second coming of Jesus Christ. Get this enlightening lesson by calling 1-800-END-TIME or go to endtime.com.
Welcome back, everybody. We're discussing the New World Order is world government, and I'm establishing the fact that the United Nations is that world governing body. And before we went to the break, I said that the United Nations Charter is the motherboard of global governance right now, and it's making it possible for things like the Millennium Development Goals to be pushed through and implemented throughout the world. Well, do you know that the Millennium Development Goals expired this year, and the new Sustainable Development Agenda was unanimously adopted by 193 UN members? The new Sustainable Development Goals include 17 specific goals with 169 targets. Goal number 16 is devoted to making all nations more accountable, with one of the targets seeking to broaden and strengthen the participation of developing countries in the institutions of global governance. Folks, the United Nations, from its inception until now, has and always will be a socialistic world governing body. Alger Hiss, a convicted communist spy, wrote the United Nations Charter, and for the last 70 years they've been building this world governing body until now we get to the point where they're saying right now, hey, this is the motherboard of all our global governance scheme, this United Nations Charter. And they're not even trying to really hide it anymore. It's just out there. When Secretary of General Ban Ki-moon can say, hey, you guys can have all your nationalistic flags, that's fine. But the only one true flag for all of us is the United Nations blue flag. They're not trying to hide it anymore. It's a global governing body, and they're pushing their agenda. When you talk about the United Nations, you hear it in the news all the time, think global government. So, the deadly wound. Revelation 13:3 says, and I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. So what happened to the United Nations? What does Revelation 13:3 mean when it says one of the 7 heads was wounded as if it were almost dead? What does it mean when it says the wound was healed? What does it mean when it says the entire world wondered after the beast? Well, in order to understand this, let's first identify which of the 7 heads was wounded unto death, and then how it was healed and how it became the New World Order. After the United Nations was formed in 1945, everything did not work out as planned, because the Soviet Union received much of Europe as a result of the Yalta negotiations and as a result of Alger Hiss's actions. There was a lot of tension going on. So, for a while, it appeared as if Russia would end up ruling all of Europe and that communism would dominate Europe. So to keep this from happening, the United States of America led the Western powers into NATO, or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. NATO was a military alliance to counter the Warsaw Pact, the communist bloc of Eastern Europe. As a result, the UN was rendered largely ineffective due to the Cold War, the East against the West. The United States was given veto power at the formation of the United Nations. The members of Congress were unwilling to approve a world government structure unless the U.S. had absolute veto power. When the U.S. was given veto power, Great Britain, France, China, and USSR demanded veto power as well. All of these victor nations of World War II were given veto power. They formed the Big Five, the 5 permanent members that make up the UN Security Council today. They still have that veto power. They could veto almost anything this world government structure decided to do. You remember when we were going to go in, Obama was going to go in and bomb Syria a couple years ago, and Russia and China vetoed that. We got a UN resolution to do that, and Russia and China vetoed that. There's nothing we could do. Our hands were tied. We turned our ships around and headed back out into the Atlantic Ocean. So notice what Revelation 13:3 says, "And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast." This is not saying the beast or the Antichrist was killed or rose again. It says one of the 7 heads of the beast was wounded to death. The only way for us to know which head was wounded or what the deadly wound was is for us to know what the heads are. So let us review what we went over in yesterday's program. The heads of the beast from Daniel 7 were merged into one beast with 7 heads in Revelation 13. This beast of Revelation 13 represents the world government. There was 1 head of the lion, 1 head of the bear, 4 heads of the leopard, and 1 head of the 10-horned beast. So which of these heads, which represents a nation, was the one that was wounded to death? Well, after World War II, the Allies, Russia, Great Britain, and the United States of America, and they all determined something to be wrong with Germany. They were concerned with Germany's history and of repeatedly plunging the world into war. So to ensure it would never happen again, they split Germany in half. They created East Germany, placing it under the Communist and the Soviet Union's sphere of influence, and West Germany, placing it under the Allied sphere of influence. By doing this, they created 2 separate German nations, reducing Germany's population and financial muscle to the point it was no longer a threat to world peace. At that time, news headlines screamed, "Germany is dead, she will never rise again." Well, when the communist reality set into East Germany and into Eastern Europe, the Eastern European people wanted to get out from under the communist tyranny. As a result, many people fled to Western Germany and into Western Europe. There was a huge hemorrhage of people, and on August 14th, 1961, the Soviet Union built the Berlin Wall, a 29-mile wall that divided East Berlin from West Berlin. They were trying to stem or to cauterize the hemorrhage of the people coming across the line. And they also established the Iron Curtain and placed lookout points throughout Europe, separating Eastern Europe and Western Europe. So let's get to the healing of the deadly wound. In the middle of the raging Cold War, the front cover of March 29th edition of 1968 edition of the Life magazine had this headline, 3.5 superpowers to rule the world. The article, written by George W. Ball, who at that time was the Deputy Secretary of State for the United States of America, stated, "In this time when there is enough nuclear weaponry to destroy all human, plant, and animal life of all the earth 25 times over," discussing the divisions causing the tensions, he said, "Somehow we've got to find a new global structure that will get rid of these terrible conflicts that threaten to blow up all of mankind." He proposed in this article that 3.5 superpowers would rule the world. His 3 powers were the United States, Soviet Union, Europe, and then Japan would be the half power. He said if these 4 powers could get together, they can ensure the borders where they are. We would not tolerate any borders ever being moved again, and we would not let little third-rate powers pulled the two nuclear superpowers into conflict and threatened to destroy the world. In the article, Ball continued discussing Germany and the division of Europe and the Iron Curtain, and in particular, the division of Germany and the Berlin Wall. On page 89, he referred to the Berlin Wall as the wound. He actually stated, where the divisions that fester like a rusty knife wound must be healed. Think about it, folks. The Bible prophesies that one of the heads or nations would be wounded and then healed. The healing of the wound was the tearing down of the Berlin Wall and is referring to Hitler's Third Reich. So consider this. There is the First Reich, the Second Reich, the Third Reich, and now the Fourth Reich that is now rising. We know beasts in Bible prophecy represent nations or kingdoms. Multiple heads on a beast represent the number of times a kingdom will rise and fall. So based on this information, if the third head was the one that was divided when Hitler's Third Reich was cut in half, that's when the deadly wound was healed. The whole world would wonder after the one world government beast. As a result of the understanding of this prophecy, Irvin Baxter began to teach in 1968 that the Berlin Wall would come down and that event would be the catalyst that would launch us into the New World Order. He taught this all the way up to 1986. It was at this time that he published his first book, A Message for the President, and included in it all of this information, including the Berlin Wall, would come down. Well, I actually have a copy of the original book, and I wanted to read you a small excerpt about the healing of the Berlin Wall and the result of that. He actually stated in this book in 1986 how impressive it would be for the bulldozers from both sides of the much-hated Berlin Wall to move in, knocking it down, while television cameras beam the sight from around the world. It is clearly seen by John in Revelation 13:3 that Germany would be divided and then her deadly wound would be healed. As these prophecies are fulfilled, the whole world will follow after the beast and be led into his kingdom, which is the one world government. So Irvin Baxter in 1986 prophesied, or he revealed the prophecy in this book that the Berlin Wall would be torn down and the two Germanys would reunite, and that would be the catalyst that launched us into the New World Order. Well, no one else believed the Berlin Wall would come down. Yet 3 years later, after he published this book, on November 9th, 1989, the Berlin Wall, in fact, did come down. The only way we knew all of this information to put in the book was because of Bible prophecy. On the 25th anniversary celebration of the building of the Berlin Wall, in the August 14th, 1986 edition of USA Today, there was an article that was titled, Berlin Wall, West is Somber, East is Festive. The Berlin Wall's 25th anniversary, Wednesday, spotted its unique role as the stark symbol of East-West differences, the bricks and mortar of propaganda, the 29-mile wound that won't heal. On November 9th, 1989, the day the Berlin Wall came down, was an incredible day. People danced on top of the wall. People broke pieces from the wall to keep for memory's sake. The people from the slavery of communists of Eastern Europe came pouring across the border. It was a very festive time. When we get back to the break, I'll finish on this thought process, and then we'll finish our lesson here on New World Order, is world government.
If ever people need to hear the unvarnished truth, it is now. There are some subjects that are not politically correct to talk about, but they're urgent. That's why I'm grateful for Endtime Magazine. If you're not a subscriber, you're missing information that will really impact your life. Endtime has a bi-monthly magazine that explains how current events are fulfilling Bible prophecy. You can get a 2-year subscription for only $29. You can also get a bulk subscription and pass them out to your church. We have gotten reports that Endtime Magazine has caused spiritual awakenings in churches when they see the prophecies being fulfilled right now. You can start your own ministry and leave them in doctors' offices, libraries, laundromats. You never know if you might be responsible for saving someone who is searching for the unvarnished truth. That's what the magazine did in my life. Call 1-800-363-8463. That's 1-800-END-TIME and get your subscription today.
Watch the prophecies come alive on End of the Age every Monday night at 7:30 p.m. Central Time on TBN. If you're wondering questions like, why is anti-Semitism rising in our world again? What are the 7 trumpets? And what about the Antichrist? Where will he come from? What will happen at the second coming of Christ? And what is even my place in the end time? All these questions are answered on our End of the Age television program. You can watch it on TBN, the Church Channel, Daystar, and more. Call us at 1-800-END-TIME to find what station End of the Age is on in your area. That's 1-800-363-8463. Or go to endtime.com and click the broadcast link.
Welcome back to Politics and Religion, everybody. Before the break, we were discussing the celebration of the tearing down of the Berlin Wall, and the huge people were dancing on the wall. They were coming across the border. The people from Western Germany met them and gave each one of them coming across from the east side $600 spending money. People partied and celebrated. On November 20, 1989 edition of Time magazine, an article entitled Wall of Shame, 1961-1989, stated the most palpable evidence was of a deep wound in European civilization, and it is finally gone. So the healing of the deadly wound in Revelation 13 was the Berlin Wall, which tore apart Germany, and it was healed when the Berlin Wall was torn down. Irvin Baxter wrote it in his book in 1986, and it came down in 1989, a fulfilled prophecy written 2,000 years ago. So, 2,000 years ago, Revelation 13 called the division of the third head of the leopard the wound that just won't heal. It was a wound, it was a deadly wound, but the deadly wound was healed. What happened when the deadly wound was healed? The New World Order was birthed. It happened quickly. Mikhail Gorbachev and George Herbert Walker Bush and Pope John Paul II, within 20 days of the fall of the Berlin Wall, met together at Malta. When they came out of those meetings, they announced the birth of the New World Order. While serving as Secretary of Defense of the United States under George Bush, Dick Cheney made an interesting statement. In the September 29, 1991 issue of the Indianapolis Star, in his explanation concerning why there was a treaty signed to reduce weapons, he said, "There is a good reason to take these steps now. The world is in a new era of promise that started 2 years ago with the collapse of the Berlin Wall." He was referring to the birth of the New World Order. On November 9, 1999, Merrill Lynch, in an attempt to advertise their financial services, published this statement. The world is 10 years old today. It was born when the wall fell in 1989. It's no surprise that the world's youngest economy, the global economy, is still finding its bearings. The intricate checks and balances that stabilize economies are only incorporated with time. Many world markets are only recently freed, governed for the first time by the emotions of the people rather than the fists of the state. From where we sit, none of this diminishes the promise offered a decade ago by the demise of the walled-off world. The spread of free markets and democracy around the world is permitting more people everywhere to turn their aspirations into achievements, and technology, properly harnessed and liberally distributed, has the power to erase not just geographical borders, but also human ones. It seems to us that for a 10-year-old, the world continues to hold great promise. In the meantime, no one ever said growing up was easy. So they're talking about globalization, the process of moving into the New World Order. In Time magazine in 1992, Mr. Strobe Talbot stated in his article titled The Birth of a Global Nation that in the 21st century, national sovereignty as we know it would cease to exist. we would all answer to a single global authority. Remember what I said at the beginning of the program. Mr. Ban Ki-moon just stated about a few days ago that our one flag for everybody is the blue flag of the United Nations. Sounds kind of like what Mr. Strobe Talbot's talking about here. In an interview with the Council on Foreign Relations, Strobe Talbot stated, "Let me also say a word of acknowledgement, first of all, to the Council on Foreign Relations. It's great to be back here. I love this institution. It's been a terrific part of my education over the decades." He was then asked by the moderator of this interview, "Mr. Talbot, you write that there has always been and always will be a tension, sometimes creative, sometimes destructive, between, on the one hand, the concept of an international community that recognizes interdependence as a fattened collective governance and as a necessity, and on the other hand, the appeal of a national community that thinks of itself as an independent and sovereign. How can people who believe as you do and broadly put those voices in the Democratic Party, those voices we associate more with the Democratic Party, talk about global governance without setting off alarm bells that the One Worlders and Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission are all coming for them to get both their guns and their Bibles and still turn it into a one world government? What is the vocabulary of global governance that is politically or culturally most appealing?" Well, Mr. Talbot, Strobe Talbot, replied to this question. Or, to put it differently, why is global governance almost a no-no phrase for those who want to avoid political radiation poisoning in our debate? I actually did some research on the web and elsewhere about this, and I was interested to discover that the phrase global governance is assiduously avoided. Global governance is a phrase which is used quite commonly in the curricula of universities all around the world and in publications and that kind of thing. I certainly learned very quickly, including the hard way, to avoid it when I was in the State Department. Even though I was working for a president who, as a liberal internationalist is somebody who believes in a one world government, and that was Bill Clinton. And it does still have this association with the sure of rotors of the black helicopters getting ready to land in our schoolyards and so forth and so on. World government obviously suggests that you've got a single capital somewhere and a single flag, and presumably single flag right there it is. Remember Ban Ki-moon's statement, a single national anthem, and the sovereignty of all other nations is subordinate to that. And by the way, Harry Truman did believe in this, the federation of a world and the parliament of man, and that it is a dream that some still entertain for the future. Remember, Ban Ki-moon stated in that article that the United Nations is the #1 parliament of humanity. Some still entertain that for the future, but global governance, in the sense that I think the phrase is properly used, is not a dream. It's a reality. And we've had it for a long time. In the modern age, i.e. now, we have global governments in lots of forms. Some of them are associated with the United Nations. Others are associated with the World Trade Organization, the World Health Organization. There's regional governance. It's just a fact of life. So I see global governance as nothing more or less than a way of collectively, as sovereign states, managing the fact and the ongoing process of globalization and the fact of interdependence. So he's very brash in saying, hey, the global government, the world government has been here for years. It's nothing new. It's a fact, and it will continue, which it has since Mr. Talbot gave this interview. Well, you ask, who is Mr. Talbot? He worked in the Clinton administration for 7 years. He was Clinton's roommate when they both were Rhodes Scholars in London, England, and now he is the president of the Brookings Institute. And Susan Rice, who was President Barack Obama's foreign affairs advisor, worked under Strobe Talbot at the Brookings Institute. This man who believes in a one world government, guess what? Now Susan Rice has now been tapped by President Obama to be our ambassador to the United Nations. We are watching world government, globalization, world trade, World Bank, World Criminal Court. We are watching the one world government right now. Pope Francis, in his encyclical, called for a global political authority to manage the global warming and climate change hoax. Of course, the Pope's encyclical was strategically published just a few months before the United Nations Climate Summit to be held in Paris, France, from November 30 to December 11th. This 21st meeting of the Conference of Parties, COP21, has drawn heightened attention as it expected to ratify the first global climate accord since the 1997 Kyoto Protocol. With this version of COP21 binding all 195 COP member nations rather than the solely industrialized world. Climate change is the United Nations' established hoax to redistribute wealth from developed to underdeveloped countries. So you remember that the United Nations was established to be a socialistic world governing body, and one of the major planks of socialism is wealth redistribution. Furthermore, in a recent speech, President Obama pledged his support to the United Nations as a world governing body. He stated this institution was founded because men and women who came before us had the foresight to know that our nations are more secure when we uphold basic laws and basic norms and pursue a path of cooperation over conflict. And strong nations, above all, have a responsibility to uphold this international order. What's he referring to? The New World Order, the United Nations. Always remember this when you're following your news, watching TV, wherever you do your research. The United Nations was established to be a one world governing body. This one world governing body was prophesied in Revelation chapter 13, and you're watching it come to pass right now. Without biblical prophecy, we would have no way of knowing what was coming next. So we're watching it happen right now. Revelation chapter 13, 2,000 years ago, John, the Apostle John, wrote and said there's going to be a world governing body formed just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ. Folks, New World Order, the United Nations is set up to be that world governing body, and it's going to be fully established and ruled by the Antichrist in the very near future. Recognize it so that you never comply or pledge allegiance to it. Have a good day, and Lord bless y'all.
Politics and Religion is a production of Endtime Ministries. It is a daily 1-hour broadcast dedicated to bringing you the prophetic fulfillments happening on a daily basis.
If you would like to listen to archive shows, subscribe to Endtime Magazine, find a prophecy conference in your area, order Endtime resources, watch our TV show, or subscribe to our free weekly e-news, call 1-800-ENDTIME or go to endtime.com and take advantage of what our site has to offer.
Connect to Endtime Ministries by partnering with us and help this message make a global impact.
Endtime Ministries is partner supported. We would like to say thank you to all of our loyal partners, listeners, and friends for helping make Politics and Religion and Endtime Ministries possible.